Yeah, welcome very, very much to Conversations. A pleasure to welcome to the program Reverend Kevin Annett. He's from Canada, and he is an intellectual, and he's a man of the cloth who's been doing work in terms of some of the scriptures dictum to do and be concerned with the least among us. He's brought out evidence about the very bad treatment of the American Indian Aboriginal peoples of North America by the Canadian government, a metaphor for other peoples who've been treated badly by power structures. He's bringing that to attention. And Kevin, welcome very, very much to Conversation in New York.
Thank you.
Maybe you could share your background, if you would. You're a man of the cloth. You were involved in the clergy as a clergyman. But share your background. Maybe a little even begin born and raised and that sort of thing.
Well, I'm born and raised in the Canadian prairies, and first minister in the family in living memory. Our family were Scots-Irish immigrants, driven out of the Highlands, driven out of Ireland, actually. So a bit of little resonation going on there when I learned these things. But also around my late 20s, I became a minister in the United Church of Canada. My first charge was out on the prairies, but my third posting was on Vancouver Island. So we're talking the west coast of Canada. Port Alberni, which was like a major logging town there. And
Port Townsend. There's a Port Townsend?
That's in Washington, south of us.
Oh, that's south.
Yeah,
right.
so we're like north of Seattle, that area.
Right, you are.
Puget
Sorry,
Sound, Vancouver Island.
Yeah.
That was the area historically in the late 1800s where a lot of missionaries came and wiped out about 90% of the Indians in one generation.
Wait a minute, 90%?
Yeah, smallpox.
We have figures that show that.
Yeah, we do.
Was that done in any way deliberately, or was it done as a clash of civilizations, one of which wasn't equipped to deal with a disease?
Well, it was both, but there was definite intent involved. There's records of smallpox blankets being distributed all over Vancouver Island deliberately, just like they were on the East Coast.
Yes, indeed.
The Amherst diaries have proven that now.
Right.
General Amherst, who did it. It was a common practice of the British to do that all over the world.
It's a common practice for conquering peoples to treat conquered people in that manner.
Oh, yeah.
It's part of history.
Unfortunately, it's true. Okay. And in Canada, it has such a squeaky clean image that people find it hard to imagine this happening.
Right.
But no, I was living witness to all these people coming forward. And they came into I got to, in summer of 1992, I was married at the time. We had two small daughters, 6 and 3 at the time. And we got to Port Alberni, and the very first service I was doing on a Sunday morning, I looked out and there was only 20 people in the congregation. They were all white. And I asked them how come there were no Indians in church, because, you know, there were a lot of natives in the area.
You were newly appointed to this,
right? I just started
And you hadn't been into the issue before that?
I didn't know anything about it. I had a very vague idea about Indians, but I didn't know anything about Indian boarding schools.
You had to study to become a member of the cloth.
You
have a master's divinity degree.
Yeah, it's a master's degree. It takes 5 years.
Yeah, right. Okay, Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, so I began to ask about that. The white people in church told me don't look into it. They don't want to mix with whites. The Indians keep to themselves, just ignore them. It's kind of the attitude.
Right.
But I got called out the very first week I was there to do a wedding at a native home. And it stood on the grounds of what had been the Alberni Indian boarding school, and run by my church at the time, the United Church of Canada. And the very first native person I spoke to in that home told me that their best friend had been murdered in the boarding school and then buried in the hill out back.
Good grief.
And I heard those stories every time I went into a native home.
And it hadn't occurred to you, having come from the plains, it hadn't occurred it had occurred there as well. Is that Manitoba, or
it was Manitoba, Winnipeg I was from.
Winnipeg, yeah.
But these schools were there was over 130 of them. They were all over Canada, mostly in the West.
Okay.
And half these children who went into the schools never came out. The death rate was around 40 to 60%.
Higher than Auschwitz?
Higher.
Higher than the death rate at the people who were in the Auschwitz camp in Germany?
That's right.
Higher death rate? And was it done in a deliberate pattern, or how do we get to that question?
It was deliberate. There was a Dr. Peter Bryce who worked for the Department of Indian Affairs. In 1909, he did a study of all of the schools, and I've got his report printed at the back of my book. It's actually online at hiddennolonger.com.
Yes, hiddennolonger.com is a major, go ahead.
And this Dr. Peter Bryce studied all of the Indian boarding schools in the West, and he found that the reason so many children were dying is staff in every school, Catholic or Protestant, they were taking children who are healthy and deliberately housing them with kids dying of tuberculosis, never treating them. deliberately forcing them to play together.
Can you validate that it was a deliberate, not an accidental?
Well, it's deliberate as in it was happening over 50 or 60 years later. They were still doing it.
Wow. After they would have obviously known.
Yeah, and we have eyewitnesses in our film Unrepentant, which you can see on the same website, talking about how they were forced to play and sleep with kids who had tuberculosis. That wasn't the custom.
And it was known. It wasn't as though they didn't know that there was a connection between
back
it being
then,
passed.
if you were a white person, you got tuberculosis before penicillin, they put you in a TB sanitarium right away.
Right. I remember. I can remember.
Indians were made. I even have a picture in my book showing healthy Native kids sitting with kids with bandages who have open TB sores in a classroom, sitting together.
Oh my God.
So we even have photographic proof of this.
And there was knowledge that there was a contagion there.
Oh, of course there was. Yeah, that's why they isolated white kids, but not Indians. So it was
and they
deliberate.
did isolate white.
They did regularly, but this was deliberate germ warfare.
It was germ warfare?
To get rid of the Indian populations, because they had to get the land and the resources very quickly.
This school was a church-run school?
Run by the United Church of Canada.
That's the church you were associated with?
I was before they tossed me out.
They would have tossed you out when you brought this up.
I brought it up, not right away, but what got me tossed out was I found out that the church, you see, their missionaries got a lot of land through the crown. They just said, if you move into an area, you've got that person's in that area to yourself. The church owned the land all of a sudden, even though Native people have been living on it for tens of thousands of years.
They didn't have clear title.
No, well, not according to English law.
In the way the English law was trying to impose itself, right?
Right, so the missionaries were given the land. Later, the church would often sell off the land to logging companies, mining companies.
Yeah.
And I found out a case about that where the United Church had profited off stolen native land. I wrote to the church about it.
Stolen native land, okay.
After writing to the church about it, I was tossed out without cause.
And that didn't have to do with the genocide that we're talking about. That had to do with just a land deal.
It had everything to do with the genocide, because the genocide was about grabbing the land, getting the natives to get
Why would they not have been able to grab the land and just not do the genocide?
Too many Indians there. There was thousands of them all over the coast. They had to get rid of them, depopulate the area, which they did.
They couldn't have seized the land and put them in reservations or something, or
the Indians outnumbered the whites in the West right up until the 1920s.
In the West?
Yep.
Until the 20s?
Until the 1920s. That's when you see a lot of white immigration came in from Europe.
Yeah, they were coming up the Oregon Trail, too, until
and also the railway linked Canada in 1886.
Yeah, it did, 86.
1886, and after that you had the Indian Act, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and the residential schools.
What was the Indian Act?
All brought in to get rid of the Indians.
Okay, to get rid of the Indians.
That's right, and put them on reservations, where they have about, still to this day, 10% of the original population.
10% of the original population at the time of the colonizing of North America?
Yeah, we figure the population...
That's Canada and the United States?
Just on the West Coast, the population went from about 1 million Indians down to 20,000.
Wow.
That's just in one area.
And that's the thing that we can see. We could trace back European ventures in the New World to Cortez.
Oh yeah,
or Pizarro.
That started right at the beginning, as we all know.
Right from the beginning, there was, that would be, I don't know, Genghis Khan or the Tigris Euphrates, the Tigris or the Euphrates, or both, maybe ran with blood for months because of the slaughter. They took part of the Mongol evolution. And then that would be the history of the world. But if you think of it in terms of major, what we would call Holocaust, the Holocaust delivered down on the Indian peoples of the New World, the Western Hemisphere, by European colonizing, is probably the worst example of massive slaughter.
Yeah,
although, do you understand what I'm saying?
It's the biggest in world history, yeah.
Why do we say, if we could, in the thing, people will say the Holocaust, and they're talking about the Jewish Holocaust. Why don't we say the Jewish Holocaust, the Iroquois Holocaust?
Well, that's what I do.
You do?
Yeah, I use that.
So and you don't equate the word generically, the Holocaust, with the Jewish Holocaust?
No, I mean...
Is it because they've had a better PR capability of advantaging the world's conscience on the behalf of those people who were hurt in their Holocaust? The American Indian people haven't had the PR clout to do that? Is that more or less what it is?
The Nazis lost World War II.
Right.
And there was a Nuremberg trial, so we learned about these things. If the Allies had lost, there would have been Roosevelt and Churchill would have been put on trial as war criminals.
That's that's an interesting take on things.
Yeah,
isn't
so
it? Yeah.
the reality is the natives here lost the war. They have no way of getting this truth out. Their own leaders are on the government payroll and are regularly silenced about this stuff.
Right.
So,
right.
I mean, the only people who can bring it out are the survivors on the ground, and those are the ones I've been working with.
Uh-huh.
You know, over 15 years now.
Have there been voices down, because that was the case, and then also we could lump into that, couldn't we? They had Maroons, or we had slaves. We had black people from Africa, slaves. There was
Indian,
also another class of people.
There were aboriginal slaves as well.
There were aboriginal
all over
slaves.
America and Canada, yeah.
There's been slaves throughout all of human history. Periclean Greece had slaves. It was based on slavery, and Aristotle said it would always need be so until the loom learned to weave.
Well, America never abolished slavery either. The 13th Amendment, it didn't abolish it in American prisons.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, yeah. And then there's all the slaveries, economic slavery and that kind of thing. Yeah. And we live in a generally an unjust world, always have been, still do. Generally, that kind of thing is a larger theme. But this thing against the American, have there been people who've written on that, let's say from the Anglo culture or from anyone else, who was so obvious we were shooting people and killing them? There must have been some voices of conscience, men of the cloth or others. Has there been any thing in the historical record, Canada or the United States, that paid attention to that? Or did everybody go amnesiac and say, well, they're lesser people? Or what was the rationale by which such a thing could be allowed to happen?
I'll tell you, as far back as 1907, the 50% death rate in the residential schools was public knowledge. It was on the front page of the Ottawa Citizen newspaper.
I say it again,
report.
The what?
The Ottawa Citizen newspaper.
No, the statistic.
50% plus death rate in the residential schools.
In across Canada?
Across Canada. It was talked about in the Canadian
50%,
newspapers.
yeah, okay.
Right.
What, 1907?
In 1907.
Yeah, okay.
Over 100 years ago.
It was brought up.
It was known, but it's erased from people's memories.
Yeah.
It's not
was that an item on page 54?
Front page. It's right in my book. The article.
Okay, what I'm saying is that indicative of there was a conscience on this issue by the European peoples who were carrying it out, or was it just a little sidebar thing that wasn't paid any attention to, and the no good engine except a dead engine like
that was the general attitude. Yeah,
it was.
Yeah,
by the Europeans.
It still is. Yeah, very much.
Okay, yeah, and that's something that you're taking exception to.
Well, you know, the problem in
major
Canada,
way, yeah.
The problem in Canada is that they have a very roundabout way of addressing something. The Prime Minister issued a supposed apology in 2008 about it, but he spoke generally about it. He didn't talk about children being killed in residential schools. He didn't talk about them being sterilized, which they were in Indian hospitals, the depopulation, how the people are still dying off in droves from it. Right. None of that was ever mentioned. Right. So, I mean, it's like, and they never mentioned the fact that the churches did it. The Catholic, Anglican, United Church of Canada. He never named them, even though they were the guilty parties. I mean, it's like talking about Auschwitz without mentioning the SS, you know.
Yeah.
And so that's what the situation
Or
is.
to carry it out in a little bit more contemporary, we just had a great damage done by our banking class of people who led up to the September 9, 2008 with an enfolding, or it happened back in 1929, the same thing kind of thing. And those people they just made a settlement on that, and they made absolutely sure that nobody who was responsible for the suffering and deaths and everything that are kosher with that and the suffering are going to ever have any court or any jail. No. Everybody's free.
Yeah.
And in fact, we give you trillions of dollars so that we'll keep the system that brought it on.
Well,
so they protect the people so that the system will be maintained, and they have a term for that in terms of the financial world, too big to fail. And the thing is that the story of the Aboriginal peoples in that, given a modern context, is too important. The system would fall apart if that was made real. Or where do we stand in terms of that?
What's happened with the churches in this whole thing is that they've indemnified themselves, and the government has indemnified the churches.
Right, the establishment order.
That's right. The Canadian government did that, the Crown of England, and the Vatican.
It's a higher calling.
And what they did was they said, if you issue... Well, the churches haven't apologized formally. The government did it for them. And the government has gotten the church off the hook. They've apologized for them. They've paid money on their behalf. And in return, the Native people get the princely sum of $10,000, but they have to sign away any legal action against the churches. And
that's the part I'm talking about.
Right. And so, I mean, it's like
and that's a paltry something. compared to the
Well,
the actual.
I mean, if your child was raped and murdered, and if your life was destroyed so you
Yeah.
can never work again, would you want $10,000?
Yeah,
in
yeah.
an
I mean,
apology?
it's insulting.
No, it's,
And you're going to call that,
designed-
and they keep them so poor that even that would be something to somebody, and they're willing to sell out to that and not have any reckoning for the people who cause it. And that's a historical pattern. If the winners win, then they are above the law. In a certain sense, they're above the law or the purpose of the law if they're the winner.
Well, it's not only...
We've got to get used to that.
It's not only that it's insulting for them, it's designed to re-traumatize people so that they collapse. And you see, the genocide that started...
Collapse into impotence.
The genocide that started has never stopped.
Yeah,
That's
okay.
the reality. The death rate is just as high now among Native people as it was 100 years ago.
Really?
Yes.
In contemporary times?
Yes.
On the res?
Yes, and in the city. 3/4 of Natives live on the streets. In the city.
Yeah.
The
Poverty struck.
The average death rate among urban Aboriginals is in the 50s, late 50s, early, 52, 53 is the
My
average
daddy
death
was
rate.
born in 1899. The average age was 48.
Yeah.
For a man born in the United States in 1899.
Yeah.
So it's now 78. So we've made some progress.
But
Let's
natives
keep
are
that
still
in
down
mind.
there.
There is some progress in the human experience.
Well, not among natives, they're not.
Not
on this
among
continent,
natives,
on this continent.
not among the losers.
Except those elite Indians who you see on television who are trained by the white man to do their bidding.
Who sell out is
Right.
certainly
They're
to the inappropriate, unjust order that
Right.
is called legitimate historically.
They sign treaties that sign away the land and resources of their own people. The uranium in Canada, all the water, hydroelectric power, all of it's signed away by the native chiefs to big companies here in the States.
And that's more or less the history of the world, is it not? I mean, it's not just Canada. It's not just
No,
America.
that's a system
It's
they
certainly
use all
it's
over.
the world.
Yeah, sure
The
it is.
world is that way. It's called realpolitik. If you've got the gun, you conquer, and they submit. That's all. And then you can cover up anything in doing that because the winners write the history, don't they?
Well, we're trying to rewrite the history.
Thank you.
What
I
we're
think
doing.
that's a very laudable thing, and also a thing that might be called for now.
You
And
have to.
it's been terrible. And you're doing that work. And what was the Indian Act? And they had to, I know out of history, they had to declare them less than human, or they had to put a particular category of status in terms of evolution or of standing on the people in order to carry out the outrageous things they did. Maybe you could spell out some of
The
that.
Pope did that back as the different popes did that in the 1400s
Yeah,
when they
right.
said that non-Christians don't have the right to themselves or their own land.
Non-Christians do not. Okay, that's a thing on religion. Yeah,
Yeah, and it's still, those laws are still on the books in the Vatican. They authorized every law. American Indian law said that Indians don't own their own land because they're not Christians.
You're talking about the United
The
States
United
of America?
States Supreme Court Justice Marshall in 1823
John
said
Marshall,
that. John
the
Marshall
John
said
Marshall,
that
yeah.
in the 1830s that they weren't, that non-Christians have diminished rights.
Non-Christians, not people of Indian background or racial miscegenation.
The way he said it was Indians as non-Christians have diminished rights in comparison to Christians.
That does that, yeah.
So they're dependent
And it just went
nations.
with outstanding blacks, right? Because they were slaves, yeah.
Yeah, well, they're dependent nations.
And Andrew Jackson really carried that out.
Blacks became citizens. Indians never have had that right. Formally, they may have the right. In practice, they're not allowed to because they're a targeted population. You know?
They were a targeted population in terms, and that would have economic. It's interesting to me trying to get a wider net and thinking about it. In the Vedic tradition, they came up within a spiritual tradition where they actually have, it seems laughable to me, they actually have, by the birth of the universe and everything, they have this caste of people who are untouchables. It's a different caste. I mean, they're the
Well,
people.
in effect,
you know,
that's what
we're
natives
doing.
are in
Right.
North America. There are untouchables, definitely.
So what I'm trying to say is it's universal. This thing about having an underclass that
I don't
can
know if
be
it's universal, but at least it's
almost
the same as in India.
Is there any society we can think of in history where they haven't had that kind of a certain? We would call it in the modern world the class system,
Well,
or
class
the
is
caste
for sure,
system.
but you mean formal untouchability?
Yeah, not formal untouchables, but people that are put in a number, like the serfs in a feudal order were very wallowing around in the mud while the kings were in the castle. You understand? So it's always been like that. We've had a few people who would run everything, would be in an order. They would call themselves historically legitimate, that their system is the one that's good for the time and for the future, and often it's God-given. And they represent God on earth. And then there were people that were ill-served by that. And I think it's just been like that all throughout human history.
Well, maybe, but the point is that here,
Yeah.
it was modeled with a clear intent by the church to exterminate what ended up to be about 90% of the population, the original population on this continent.
Staggering.
Yeah.
It's the worst example that we can think of by our own historical figures, and it's never mentioned or brought up in any terms other than some pitiful little
tried to civilize
crumb. Right.
As if we were the ones who could civilize anybody.
That's
you look at our track record.
Yeah, and we don't want to get away from the fact that the Vatican has also been involved in that kind of thing. The
Majorly.
Catholic Church,
They were the major force. The Crown of England, the Vatican, they're the two main actors.
The two, Crown of England. Were England worse than Spain and Portugal
we're
in the
talking
treatment?
about in terms of Canada.
Yeah.
The Crown of England and the United States.
Yeah, I'm trying to put it in a universal pattern. Maybe you'd like to identify, you want to focus on the one thing, but I'm trying to put it in a universal
Well, universally, the Vatican is a major actor there too, because they established these charters that all the kings of Europe used to conquer the whole world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they had that way of distinguishing, and that the people were lesser people because they weren't Christians.
That's right.
It goes back to religion.
Yeah, 1455, the first papal bull.
Right.
Ordering that, yeah.
Right, and that's the thing. But and I've heard people say that even the treatment of those people, the slaves, I'm thinking, and also the Americans, was worse in North America than it was anywhere else. Although it was horrible in South America, like Pizarro came and conquered, and it was massive decimation, a terrible Holocaust.
Yep.
But it's not. It doesn't resonate in the consciousness of the world civilization about how that's been the way in which civilizations come and go and call themselves legitimate.
It seems to go hand in glove. Like when chimpanzees get intelligence, they acquire the capacity to kill and eat each other. And intelligence seems to go along with warfare, anthropologically, or in terms of physical anthropology.
Yeah.
Similarly with civilization, the more developed you get it, the more murderous and genocidal it becomes. So what's true for the individual is true for the collective too.
That's really something that ought to be pondered by humanity, don't you think?
We're in a schizophrenic culture that is not able to look at its shadow.
It can't look at it. Okay, yeah. You're seeing it as Western culture.
I would say
Western culture, European.
Christendom. European, the merger of the Roman Empire with the Christian Church, which created a hybrid called Christendom.
That'd be like Constantine.
It had nothing to do with Jesus Christ. As a matter of fact, the symbol of murder of Christ on the cross is accurate because they killed Jesus in his tradition to create Christianity. And that's, that's borne out in practice. I mean, would a religion based on the teachings of Jesus slaughter 80 million people on this continent, right? Well,
yeah, and the Nazis had on the belt, God mit uns.
Yeah.
Everybody says God is on their side, and they ascribe God and the structure of the universe to their good way and their legitimacy in terms of some sort of a national identity they think is superior to others. And that's the history of the world that continues. I mean, now it's the United States. Is it not? The pattern that runs the world and thinks of itself as legitimate, we got the Marxists would call it running dogs who go along with it and everything, but it's essentially the pattern of the United States that's been imposed on the world. International Monetary Fund, all the institutions.
I think that's true in the 20th century. America now
20th and 21st.
America now in history is in the same position England was after the war. It's the declining power.
Yeah.
And China's the rising power. Right?
You think that, right?
Yeah, I believe that.
Well, we're still way in advance in terms of...
China's bought up most of Canada, a lot of its resources.
They're moving into Vancouver heavy, aren't they?
Oh, in a big way. They own. They just made a big $20 billion trade deal, British Columbia government, with China. They buy up a lot of the mines and oil and water in Canada. They've been doing that for a long time. The Chinese. Yeah.
And it's all built on this kind of a thing, this kind of a way of one system coming and wiping out. How does one culture that's developed deal with a culture that is not?
It stomps it out of existence.
No, but is there any, I mean, outside of the fact that that's what they do. That's the pattern of history. If you've got the Gatling gun, you can conquer India. You've got the weapon to override which they might have resisted. Or then you can co-opt.
The way they do it is Cortez couldn't have conquered Middle America without other tribes aligning with him. They used divide and conquer.
Oh, yeah, sure.
They couldn't have conquered India or North America without that.
And Pizarro had a handful of men that conquered the whole Inca Empire.
With the help of other natives against the Aztecs and the Inca, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. So they did do that. They were conquistadors.
Well, it happened in my ancestors' country in Ireland. They pitted, the English landed in 1172, and they got together with the clans in the south to attack the clans in the north. Divide and conquer, it works every time.
It does. And
they use it in Iran and Afghanistan.
They can do that militarily, and they can also do it by the means of what is termed now public relations and a manipulation of consciousness and co-option and that sort of thing. Yeah. And they can have their system be one that is thought of as being historically the march of history.
Well, one advantage we have, Harold, is that you know how they're going to act. You know how any empire is going to act. They're a big. They don't have a lot of maneuverability, being a big empire or corporate body, so you know exactly how they're going to behave. If you learn from history, man.
You're going to learn from history. Is there only history for us to learn from? Is there any way we could learn from a larger context of understanding?
I think so.
Do you think there's any way out of it's unjust? In terms of the mass of the world society, it's inherently unjust and inappropriate in terms of every person being really relevant, much less liberated in order to be able to realize their full. We're so far short of that stricture or that idea that is at the basis of most of the ethical thinking of the ethical wisdom schools of the world, so far that it's laughable. And we don't have a pattern that can bring that.
People don't have to go along with it. That's the point, though. We don't have to cooperate. And that's what I like about the Occupy movement.
Yes, sir.
Is that they're withdrawing consent. And once you do that, any system will fall. If you reach a critical mass, people don't have to go along with it. We say you don't have to pay tithings to these churches. You don't have to attend. You can let them collapse because they're guilty of these crimes.
Now you're talking about the churches.
The churches, but the same is true about the governments or corporations or any oppressive body.
And you think the Chinese model is emerging and that sort of thing. The American model, we have an election coming up, that sort of thing, and you have the same kind of thing going on there. And I don't know how it's all going to come out, but I know the new leader. What's his name? Is Wu. It was Hu in China, and they've got a command economy, and their religion in China, in terms of understanding material reality, much less everything else. The one thing that they want to have nothing to do with is anything to do with anything spiritual or anything Lao Tzu or Confucian or anything.
Well, ideology is for the
their
masses.
religion is Marxism.
Well, no,
and the
not
new,
really.
yes, the
I
new.
mean, in theory, it's like Americans believe in democracy, but it's not about ideology at all. It's about power.
Yes, well, it always is.
Yeah.
The democracy in that is a cover story and a PR campaign to get the power.
Right.
I mean, that's what it is. So we understand
Well,
that.
and it's to keep people in this. Like religion is designed to keep people, the masses of people, compliant and sheep-like and divided.
Well, the whole institutional structure of the country is authoritarian. The educational system is authoritarian. All the institutions are authoritarian.
Well, I find that especially trying to talk to people walking into churches on a Sunday where we say, here's the evidence that your church was responsible for the death of 50,000 people.
And what is the reaction?
The reaction is outright denial and anger at us for even suggesting that. There are some exceptions, but by and large, people are trained to be quiet and shut up and don't think for themselves.
Well, that's a good training in order to get by in society, is to
Exactly.
be quiet and be complacent and fit in, and that's what the educational and the system of, conditioning is done. In our institutions are all made up to have them accept that kind of a notion, rather than anything like being critical thinking or thinking critical or thinking, in any kind of a way like you're
the reality,
encouraging
though,
to do.
is that if you conform to this society, it's like conforming to a train that's going over a cliff. If we don't start thinking for ourselves, and I learned this from personal experience, your life is destroyed. You're going down the toilet, and that's what I think is a lesson for us. When I lost my job and my family and all sorts of stuff because of this, I went through a period where I thought my life was ruined.
And you lost that because you took this principled stand.
That's right. And when I went through a period where I thought my life was ruined, and in reality, it was to prepare me for a higher calling, which is what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
So I think people can learn from that.
Congratulations. Yeah.
I mean, people can learn from that, though.
Yeah.
From their own pain, from their own loss.
Right. They can, and everything like that. And people put themselves out in front and take a risk at that. And Usually they, but most people are just looking to be compliant and that sort of thing, and the institutions are not encouraging of that. But it's a huge thing, and you're making that available to us, that information about it. Are you getting response? The work you're putting out and everything is making it's becoming factually able to be backed up rather than just be some sort of
No, it's backed up all the time. Eyewitnesses.
Yeah. Has it been throughout the history of the two countries? Has there been an underground or academic not all people are totally self-interested. Aren't there any people of principle that have been able to carry these kind of things like you're doing now in the past?
The facts aren't really known. I mean, even in Howard Zinn's book, People's History of...
He's tried.
He doesn't make any reference at all to this genocide in the Indian boarding schools because being a white person,
well, maybe he didn't have time enough to get to that thing because there was so much abuse going on. If you start putting down all the abuses, you'd have an Encyclopedia Britannica of abuse.
That's true, but
so you can't get to every single instance of abuse because it's all abuse.
My point was, though,
that's the point.
My point was that it wasn't known and still isn't known. I try to talk to people in the Occupy movement. Nobody knows about this stuff.
Well, they should.
They should, and we're trying, but you've got a mountain of ignorance and Holocaust denial and rewriting of history.
Holocaust denial.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That's done again, using that term Holocaust, in the minds of most Americans, that's got nothing to do except for Jews. Only Jews had a Holocaust.
Yeah,
and they've made a lot of, is that not true? They say on the television, the Holocaust, the only one thing comes to mind is Auschwitz, where the death rate was less than it was in your thing that you're talking about. And those were human beings, but they don't count because they're not the chosen people.
Well, use the word Nazi Holocaust and people immediately
they don't do that. You don't say the Nazi Holocaust, you just say the Holocaust.
The immediate thing that comes to mind is 6 million dead when there were 11 million dead in the death camps. So what happened to the other 5 million?
Well, that's okay. Yeah. But is that such an order that wipes out all of the other Holocausts, like the Indian movement, South America, North America?
Although I've met a lot of Jews who disagree with that whole emphasis on what happened in Europe. They realize it happened all over the world.
That's what I'm getting at. Yeah.
I meet a lot of people who are aware of that in the Jewish community.
But they seem to do very well. In terms of that. They've had a terrible Holocaust. Why is their story been able to surface to where it was able to benefit the survivors? Whereas with the Indians, you say the situation is exactly the same as it has been. The prejudice is still all there. They're still being scapegoated. They're still being treated like lesser people. It's still being accepted. How is it the Jews were able to get the public relations space to build a culture that's very strong and a state that they can support, and the Indians cannot? What's the difference?
Well, it's simple economics. Indians in North America still sit on valuable resources. It's in the interest of a lot of corporations to wipe them out. Israel performed an important role after the war to safeguard the oil interests of the West. So economically,
Israel to safeguard the see them as a fortress.
Geopolitically, they're very important to the U.S. and others. So
how do they benefit us in terms of what does their presence do to protect our interests in terms of the oil of the Middle East?
Well, I think less and less, but
it's a thorn in the side of the Islamic world. What good does it do us to be supporting Israel?
Well, traditionally, the American oil interests were protected to some degree by having their client state there, but less and less.
I think it's been a thorn in their side. The Arab world, the street of the Arab world, and the people who have the oil, they don't have any oil. All they have are atomic bombs.
Yeah.
And they have a story, and they have ability to work public relations, and they've got a sense of their own destiny and all that kind of stuff. Why hasn't that been able to they were persecuted and scapegoated terribly. By a stupid, ignorant thing. The world's stupid ignorance has scapegoated the Indian peoples, put all kinds of stories down, made up things, written fables about it, made it bad, and they're still being able to get away with it. Why and what would it take for that kind of success of people who previously were scapegoated to get into the consciousness of the world population so that they could get their just rewards? What's the difference?
The difference, not just economics, like I said.
Economics is pretty important.
They sit on land and resources that are still coveted by corporations and that. So they've got to get them off the land. They have a vested interest in this genocide. But the second issue is the fact that Native people traditionally, indigenous people around the world look at the world in a different way. They don't buy and sell the land. They have a collective notion of child rearing, of looking at the world. Everybody has value within the society. That clashes with a market economy around the world.
Okay, thank you. So it's clash with capitalism.
Yeah. So you've got to get rid of them because they're a different model, just like you had to get rid of Cuba or Nicaragua or anybody else who tries a different model.
Okay, well, that would get down to politics then, and economic theorizing and that sort of thing, and that's true. They have that, but I'm just wondering, it's such a horror story. I know I lived among the Aymara people, I told you, in Bolivia. And I'm happy Evo Morales has emerged in that, because they've been treated shabbily ever since Pizarro by a colonial power. And so the world has. And how are we able to get something where the peoples who are less served, the least among us, are actually included in a meaningful way in a just world order? When they just maintain settlements and so forth that maintain the structure that did the oppression and the myth that inform the instruction.
I don't think there will be.
How can the establishment get away with such a propagandistic kind of manipulation of human consciousness?
They bring in their token Indians. They put them on board committees at the United Nations. They put them in. They make them Lieutenant Governor of British Columbia, a native guy. And then the world and Canada thinks we're treating natives right because we bring in a few tokens into our ranks.
Okay, that's co-option. It's called.
Yeah,
that happens.
I mean, that happens. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, all over the world, you're seeing the same pattern. 99% of the people are being wiped out, and the elites are being wined and dined. And the British used to bring the Indian leaders to Cambridge and Oxford and train them like good little imperial people. They do the same thing to people in Canada, native leaders in Canada. So don't believe what you see on the television.
Or in the history books.
Oh no, you need your own view.
And this thing you're doing there is you've suffered some sores, as they say in Yiddish, for the work you've been doing. I congratulate you enormously on doing it. It must be tough to have that. Is there a group of people that you're being able to associate with? I would think there is. I know there are people around the world who could resonate to what you're saying.
Oh, all over the place.
And you mentioned the Occupy Wall Street. I should think you take heart from that, because that is a matter of casting away the veils of propaganda and everything like that, and getting down to some of the truths that are becoming obvious to one and all.
I work with native people all over the place on the ground, but they don't have money, they don't have resources, they're not the kind of people to get me on major television or anything. But this has been a godsend, by the way, to be here at MNN. I appreciate
it's public access.
Yeah. And it's only being public media and the internet and alternative media that's allowed me to get this message out. This issue has been completely blacked out in the corporate-run media. Are we really a nation of sheep? Are the intellectuals? I mean, is there no one? No, I don't think we are.
Do you understand? How can we be so bamboozled and so?
People don't know.
No. I mean, the advertising people really know. Vance Packard, do you know of him? Do you remember? He wrote The Hidden Persuaders, how the ad agencies can know if they use a red box rather than a blue box, they'll sell more soap or whatever. We're so manipulatable by psychology.
On one level, but people have a great...
Apparently we are, because we're still accepting no good engine except a dead engine.
People have a great capacity to change and to see through it. I mean, there was a poll today that said the majority of people in America still support changes in healthcare and holding on to Medicare, despite what Mitt Romney is telling you, and trying to create the impression that people are, wanting a big change and want to check out Obama. I think people are a lot more aware and radical on the ground than the media will ever reflect. And we have to...
The media, the established media will reflect the interests of the power class, as always they do.
But they won't reflect the interests of the people on the ground. We know that.
No, they won't.
No.
That's never, I don't think that ever has it?
No, I don't think so.
I mean, is there any country where it does?
I don't know.
I don't think... What I'm saying is you're asking for a world that never has been. That's what I'm getting at. It's always in varying degrees.
So does the Bible.
Right.
The Bible has a vision of a world to come, so why shouldn't we? Why shouldn't anyone think that we can... You have that vision of the world in your heart and your mind, why not live it? Why not create it? I mean, that's what the message of Occupy, and any native person who ever stands up to talk about this stuff at the risk of their life, and I've had friends die and get killed from the police for doing that, they have that hope. The only hope you have is the future, what we can create, ultimately, I think.
Yeah, because the past doesn't give us any, the past is prologue, but yeah. You're a man of the cloth.
Not anymore. I'm not
You're
with
no, but
I'm not with the church.
You're not with the church, but you're a man of spiritual concern. And of a concern with the larger issues, not the least of which is be concerned with those the least among us, is the claim of virtually every wisdom school I've ever had any acquisition, and it's totally ignored, practically by the political class. And then the religions are bought off. You brought up the fact of the Vatican contributing to this kind of a thing, being a great source of power in the world.
Speaking of the Vatican.
And the religions are a way for manipulating public consciousness to accept the status quo.
Well, speaking
is
of
that their major function? Is Orwell said it's the opium of the masses.
But let me talk about the Vatican. And they have a financial
and religion.
They have a financial concordat, they call it, with governments around the world, and probably the United States government, to siphon tax money into the Vatican Bank.
Right.
And those are secret financial agreements that people should demand their congressmen talk about, because, you know, would taxpayers want that, to be paying millions of dollars to the Vatican when they're raping and killing children and covering it up all over the world?
Well, who's raping and killing children all over the world?
Priests and nuns. Under a law, papal law, it allows them to get away with it. It's called crimen solicitanus, and if a child is raped in a parish in America, the priest is under obligation to cover it up.
Okay, that's like they're under the obligation to cover up and protect the banks to crash the economy.
Right. Same thing.
And keep it in place.
Yep.
And keep that in place.
They got away with
That's what I'm saying.
50,000 children in Canada were murdered legally.
50,000.
More, probably, over a century. But in these schools, killed them off, and not one person has ever gone to trial in Canada for the death of a child in one of those schools.
And none of the bankers are going to go into dock for having crashed the economy.
Unless we put them there.
No, unless they are put there by something other than the system that's now being... and they said, we cannot allow that system to fail or the whole world would fall apart, because that system is historically legitimate, including we got to keep raping the children and letting the priests do it and let the people manipulate and overload and oppress the masses. We got to help keeping that going forever, because unless that's the only system we have.
A system like
it's too big to fail.
A system like that deserves to fall.
Okay, but if it does, would we want it to fall?
Yes, we do.
You don't think the thing where Mr. Paulson came in, he got down on his hands and knees to Mrs. Pelosi and said, we got to pass this 3-page bill. I don't know if September 20th, 2008, or the whole financial system of the world will totally collapse.
It should.
Do you think it should?
Yes, it should.
Who would suffer the most if that happened?
The bankers.
You think they would?
The people on the ground have a way of surviving.
You think so?
Yeah, we do.
I wish I could agree with. Spell out why you think that's the case. Because mostly when you have Great Depressions, in the Great Depressions, you still had sugar daddies. They were doing fine. A lot of them did. But the mass of the people are the people who are hurt the most.
No,
always.
Only when they're tied into the market economy.
Well, but it is a market economy.
No, but
do you think we can do away with the market economy?
There's actually an informal underground economy that accounts for a lot of what poses as the North American economy.
Okay.
The people I work with on the streets of Vancouver
survive
living by helping one another. They have mutual aid networks all over the place.
Good.
That's how I survive. I haven't had employable income in 15 years. I've been blacklisted. I've survived well. I get funding all the time to do my work. I get support on the ground. We can survive. We don't need the system to survive. We're brainwashed to think we do.
Okay.
Cut up your credit card. Pull your money out of the bank. Start supporting local exchange networks where people can survive.
Savings and loans or something? Or we do not even that? You just do it, put it under a mattress, or hide it in a sock, or what?
Local exchange and trade networks where people exchange labor and help one another.
Okay.
You got to set that up. That's the alternative we need. We don't need the money banking system. We got to get rid of it. That's what's causing the problems.
You think it is causing the problem? So you're concerned with the ethical, of the Indian peoples in the church.
Well, they had those
That's
systems.
ethical, but you're essentially also concerned with the larger political economic order.
Yeah, very much. And traditionally, Native people survived that way anyway. Native people survived using those networks.
Yeah, the Native people did. They were very much in nature. They were very much in touch. They have a sense of ecology. We certainly need that now, don't we? A sense of ecology and having some respect for nature and some of the patterns we can learn from.
A natural pattern with Mother Earth and one another. That's what we need to do.
You think so? Go back.
Well,
do away with the Industrial Revolution?
Well, it's killing the planet.
It's
killing the planet.
You think
it's
so?
Killing us,
so progress, as is normally understood, like we have should we not have penicillin Should we not have electricity? Should we not have,
Well, a lot of those things are based on natural, on herbs and medicines we get out of the earth.
That's true.
Most of the pharmaceuticals, they all come from plants and herbs and things like that. So it's a matter of recovering that ancestral and knowledge and that the natural
You think we can go back to living embedded in nature?
I think
the humankind could do that?
We have to try to do something like that because we don't have a future the way we're going. So it's got to be tried. Look, we survived 1 million years before the industrial system. How did we do that?
We weren't here 1 million years before the industrial. We as a species, we were 200,000 years.
Well, I mean, it depends on who you believe, but I mean, the anthropology says that our ancestors going back Homo habilis and that go back 500,000 years.
Well, Homo habilis was not Homo sapien.
Okay,
but then it goes back to.
Let's not split hairs. The point is that hundreds of
no,
thousands
it's
of
okay.
years.
You can do it because there's a thing called science. There's a thing called knowledge. There's a thing called intelligence.
I know.
Should we give up on intelligence? Should we accept
No,
God?
we're not talking
Should we
about
accept
that.
the means by which self-reflective consciousness had to deal with that? Or is there a growth of understanding that we've gained through the process of increased understanding
We're
of
not
things?
saying give up on any of that. We're talking about giving up on the industrial technocratic system, corporate oligarchy that's destroying the planet.
Well, they had that ever since 8 to 10,000 years ago. Too bad they invented a Neolithic revolution and got surpluses and built empires. It was pharaohs, and then there were kings. There have always been, should we do away with civilization?
That system's fine if you live on top, but if you're on the bottom of the heap, I would say those people would say, yeah.
Well,
let's
yeah,
get
but
rid
it's
of
a big thing.
civilization.
That's 8,000 years or 10,000 years. Most of the time we were running away, being eaten by cats. We were like animals. We were being eaten by cats who were very larger than us, by and large. It wasn't some
No, I don't think it was a golden age, but I'm just talking about what exists now. What exists now is not sustainable or viable.
Well, it isn't, but that doesn't to say we can't just do away with civilization,
No,
can
I never
we?
said we should.
No, we do away with what? What do you want a socialist system? How are you going to destroy? You're going to do away. You think it would be? That's really a big thing to chew off. That we let the system fall apart.
It is a big thing to get into.
Yeah, I don't think that could. I don't think. I wonder if you think
I guess the reality is it is falling apart, Harold. And the question is where you're going to be when it does.
that is falling apart. Okay, that's very dangerous.
Well, it's happening as we speak.
You think it is? Yeah. Maybe that's a thing that the Occupy movement is doing. But I'm not so sure that we can. I'm not so sure that we have to just sort of give up on civilization.
Well, reinvent it is all I'm saying.
Reinvent, or there's a capability. I just did a program with you were, I don't know, this booth, but do you think there's? My daddy was he lived to be 48. He was buried in his 48th average birth date. Okay, the average age of humanity over the long haul is probably 20. There has been some progress. We know more now than we did.
Sure we do.
We know more all the time.
Yep.
In fact, we're getting to the point, with good design, we can take care of everybody in a way that we've never been able to do. Aristotle said, it has to be slaves until and unless the loom learns to weave. There's very little cloth that isn't weaved by machines now. Or we got a transponder takes place of 175,000 tons of copper cable to connect to the London and New York with a 400-pound transponder on a satellite. We have the microchip that's giving an internet is something by which we can get a revolution going. That's all part of an evolutionary extension of consciousness in the ability to make things. And we do also have a capability of providing life support, like Fuller and some of the people who are seeing it, life support for greater numbers of people in a way that we've not had. It's been a world of scarcity. We may actually be transcending at a certain level. It has to be carefully modulated, thought through, but it's not to be dismissed. We may be transcending. There are more haves and have-nots at the level of capability.
To get back to the issue,
for the first time. That is the issue.
Well, yeah,
that
but,
is
but
the
to
issue.
relate to the issue of genocide, all of that has been at the expense of millions of people all over the world.
Of course, history is a nightmare of injustice from which we're attempting. Can we awaken?
But why does
not
it
awaken, not to go back. There's nothing to go back to except an unjust system. You can't go back, and history is the point.
Why is it
I don't think that's too easy.
That?
It is 99.99999% of all the species that have ever existed have gone extinct. We now have a capability at our own hands. That's a larger issue with the weapons which we use to wipe out the entire Homo sapiens species. Do you think that's true? Since about 1970, the model shows that. We can now stop evolution with the weapons that exist. We don't have a system that can be, and we also have a capability of liberating from the ancient scourges and from the slings and arrows of unjust system. There's enough for everybody if there is a good design capability to provide for everybody within an ecological context, doing more with less, ephemeralization. There's a possibility of liberation, which has been the aim of all of the wisdom schools. And are we going to just try to go back?
Well,
we're not going to incorporate all of that knowledge?
I'm not sure where you got the idea that we were saying that, because we're not talking about going back. We're talking about a new deal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Do you think it's true that we have weapon systems that would wipe out the species if they were unleashed?
Of course we do.
Do you think we're hell-bent for doing that, given the fact that we still have the model of realpolitik?
I think whatever is going to profit the system, they'll do it. But I think the people in power are so myopic.
What about the people who aren't in power? Are we myopic by not having something that is being presented other than going back to nature?
I think the people in power are so myopic that they're the last people you appeal to.
Are the intellectuals myopic?
Yes.
Where are the intellectual ones who can bring a kind of question of where the hell we are in terms of the evolution of consciousness in universe? Are we coming to the end of the human species?
I don't know.
You don't know. But when you get to the point where I asked you, do you think the weapons finally, that's when the modeling shows it. We were protected as recently as the Second World War against mass extinction of the entire Homo sapiens species. We couldn't do it. We were trying, and we became the winner. But after about 1970, the weapons, if they're unleashed, would be the end of evolution of consciousness, the end of the Homo sapiens species. Do you think that's true? A fact, an existential reality in universe after 10,000 generations? They could wipe out the entire Homo sapiens species with the weapons. That's the only thing that could do it. Not an asteroid, not warming or anything, but that could do it. And that's a new existential reality.
Well, I guess a comet could do it too.
A comet? An asteroid, I think an asteroid, we could even detect an asteroid long enough to be able to deflect it now with what we've got. We've taken a picture of the shock wave of the Big Bang after 13.87 billion years ago. We've got some capability, technological capability, and we've got a capability of providing for everybody. There's no reason for people to be hungry. There is enough since about 1970. So it's a completely different thing. If there is enough, then you can have what is called liberation, and you don't have to rape the planet to do it through good design. So we got an opportunity to transcend history and liberate the problem. And it might bring us into a resonating relationship to universe, transcendent to what we've been collectively throughout the whole evolutionary process. I mean, I don't quite understand how we're, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to rant. But I don't think that the major problem, my way of thinking is, it's not, let's get a system that's going to liberate the people who are being oppressed, and the ecology, and those kind of things we argue politically, who the bad guy is. It's got to have something that will liberate ecologically, and the big challenge is one that will be able to be understood by the ones who are responsible for the outdated institutions, haltingly, as a way in which we're going to establish an operating manual for Spaceship Earth for a liberated order.
The work I've been doing, it's a danger to think too big, because what you do by that is you lose contact with the people who you can't help.
Well, that would be like saying there's no point in thinking about the larger issues. Let's be reductionist.
No, I didn't say that. I said that if people look at the problem too big, you get overwhelmed by it, and you get to a level of abstraction where human beings are lost in the equation.
Well, that may be the thing that'll do us in.
No, that's the problem with politicians and
No, politicians aren't saying that.
Because
politicians aren't taking that order.
The reason they can't see the problem is they don't see human beings anymore.
No, you're finding the enemy, and that's okay. I agree with you. They're our enemy, and I don't agree with that.
I'm not talking about an enemy. I'm talking about the problem.
I'm talking about the intellectuals.
No, the problem is that this is a very human matter. This is about children who died and were taken away, and unless you stay focused on that, you lose the whole picture. You lose the whole message.
Well, you and I disagree. That's fine. I think that's a myopic view, which is one that is politically advantageous for certain kind of people to find the enemy. You want to find the enemy, the bad guys.
I just said it's not about an enemy.
Well, it seems to me it is. You're talking about the people who oppressed other people and suffering the other people. And the Republicans will say it's the Democrats will say it's the Republicans, and everybody will fight, and that's what can unleash the thing. What you need to have is something comprehensive. That's the rule. That's for the intellectuals. Where the hell are they who are thinking about things? And to say that to think too big is going to get people, I think that's the problem.
I didn't say too big. I said you lose sight of the individual.
No, they will lose sight of the big pattern. Norbert Wiener, I had a friend who was in the room with Norbert Wiener when they coined the term cyber. And in cyber language and in that kind of thing, they have a thing called information overload. We're being inundated every day with a revolution that comes in over the transom from every field now. We're being inundated with information overload. We got a reductionist education thing where everybody gets specialized on one thing. If you get this problem solved, everything's going to be, and everything. But information overload permits pattern recognition. And why is no one thinking about patterns in terms of at an evolutionary context, which is the charge of the wisdom schools and of the intellectual community? It's the intellectual community that's falling down on the job by specializing in one aspect of an overall thing. The big pattern is what we should be looking at. Why are we so co-opted? That's my claim. That's what I'm thinking. Why are we so co-opted not to think about the larger context within which the evolution of consciousness in the universe is transpiring, now that we got the means of having some understanding of it? I'm sorry. I don't think that's what we need. Not to avoid that, but to look at those patterns and where are they? I'm sorry. Well, that's what I think. I think we're on the verge. As a guy, Asimov, we did a program. This is the defining generation. It's not the generation from the last century or that or something. This is the defining generation in a major way, not in all of the evils that we can come up with, which are manifest in terms of, and the biggest challenge is to do it in a way that can stave the hand of those who are going to, I don't think, I got upset when you said you're going to let the whole financial system fall apart. I think it would be disastrous. It would unleash the weapons. If you had that, if there wasn't that, holding, we have to anchor to history. We can't be we have to subsume it, and we have to anchor to it. We can't let it be reified and be established. So that's a major challenge in my view. But congratulations on the work, because it's got to be called. And what you're doing in calling that attention to the world is magnificent. That you're doing it because it's absolutely called for. And we agree on one thing: Occupy Wall Street can put some pressure on the system, horizontal, getting out wide to get some sort of a transformed world, because we sure need it. And this is the most challenging generation. Okay, I think we've come to the end. I'm sorry. So listen, thanks for all the good work.
Thanks, Harold.
Okay, your pleasure to have the perceptions in of Reverend Kevin Annett, who's doing really good work in what the genocide that's delivered down on the Barry Indian peoples and the others within a larger context. And thanks a lot for that work. It's really good. Keep it up. And thank you for viewing. We'll be coming back again tomorrow. Okay, they got a graphic up even at the end. So I didn't mean to get carried off on that, but I feel very lonely.